Welcome once again to The Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos. I'm a sociologist at John Jay College here in New York City, and we welcome you all to our show every Sunday evening at 8 p.m. on MNN. If you miss us on Sunday, you can catch a repeat of the show every Thursday on MNN4, also at 8 p.m. The topic of the drug war in this country is really ground zero for so much of what we've been discussing on this show. Perhaps nowhere else is the systemic racism, economic inequality, and creation of a poverty-stricken scapegoat population more clearly spelled out than in our society's reaction to the use of illicit drugs in this country. Perhaps nowhere else is the intellectual and academic complicity, spiritual hypocrisy, and media hysteria more clearly played out than in these policies. Perhaps nowhere else is the reliance on violence, cruelty, humiliation, and militarism of our culture more apparent than in this so-called war. And perhaps nowhere else do we more need a progressive imagination of radical love and a data-driven social science policy to end this irrational and hysterical drug war on ourselves. Our guest tonight, Columbia University neuroscientist Hart, has been on the cutting edge of this struggle for many years. His 2013 book, High Price, literally has been in the forefront of challenging assumptions about drugs and society and has helped to redefine our understanding of addiction. Carl is the first tenured African-American professor in the sciences at Columbia and is one of the most respected and courageous research activists the American Academy has produced. So happy he's here tonight to share his work and ideas with us. I'm so proud to have him as a colleague, fellow activist, and dear friend. So thank you, Carl, so much for being here. And I know many of our audience knows of you and your work, but others may not. So to get us going, could you tell us a little bit of how you got started in this, what your basic research has been about, and what you've, as an activist, what have you been involved in?
I just want to make one correction. The Academy didn't produce me. The hood produced me. The black community produced me, and those kind of conditions produced the person that I am. The Academy just helped me to adapt a language that mainstream understands and present these ideas in a way that is digestible to usually white Americans. But please don't get it twisted. The Academy did not produce me.
I don't think I meant it that way.
No, I just want to be clear. It's
clear.
So the kids in the hood and people understand that they too can be challenging the things that I'm challenging. It relates to my work. When I think about, as you say, what do I do? What's my work? My work is that I'm a scientist, and being a scientist, I'm a scientist first. Being a scientist first, the thing that science deals with, the currency, is data and evidence. And I'm a scientist that studies drugs. And when I say I study drugs, I actually bring people into the laboratory and test the effects of a wide range of drugs like cocaine, crack cocaine, methamphetamine, marijuana, a wide range of recreational drugs. We do this in order to help people who may have drug problems and also to better understand what drugs do and what drugs don't do. And when you do this under carefully controlled conditions, under rigorous sort of using rigorous experimental techniques, you now actually know what's reality and what's myth, what's hype, what's anecdotes, what's bullshit, what's real. That's what you know. And so my work tries to bring to the public reality versus the myth that the public so often deals with when they think about drugs.
And what I was driving at in that intro, though, is again, you stand out in this academy world because so many of your colleagues, even though they say they're data-driven, have not taken the activist role or have taken that data forward to the extent that you have and exposed the hypocrisy. That's what I was trying to get at.
No, absolutely.
And that, of course, comes from that background, too.
But I precisely understood you. I mean, what you said, it was beautiful because it allowed me an opportunity to explain what might be a difference between myself and some of my colleagues.
Right, right. I think it's important.
And one of the, and it gets to the question is like, well, why haven't other people shared with the American public some of the concerns that I've raised, or some of the inconsistencies with the data and then what we're doing with policy, with treatment, with education?
The data's been there for years,
That's
right? And you've been studying this for
That's
years,
right. The data has been there for years.
The evidence, quote unquote. Yeah.
Let's take a step back, because somebody might say, well, what do you mean the data? What about the data?
Okay, tell us.
When we think about drugs like crack cocaine, we think about drugs like marijuana, methamphetamine. We have been told that those drugs, in some cases, produce unpredictable effects. They're so dangerous that people should not use them. And that's just simply not true. That's not why people should not use them. And this is not an endorsement of people going out to use illegal drugs. People shouldn't do that. We know people should not use illegal drugs for a variety of reasons. But what we've been saying about these illegal drugs in terms of the public education has just been lies. The fact is, what we know is that there are positive effects associated with people using a drug like crack cocaine. Otherwise, people wouldn't do it. And the vast majority of people who use a drug like crack cocaine don't have problems with it. They're not addicted. They're not crazy. They're not all of those horrible things we said. Now, that's not to say that one should go out and use crack cocaine, because if you don't know what you're doing, you certainly increase the likelihood of getting in trouble with that drug. Mm-hmm. That's one thing. And another thing is that when we think about street drugs, we don't know what the adulterants or the cut, what else is in that drug,
which makes it much more dangerous.
Makes it much more dangerous. All of these unknown variables can make it dangerous, but that doesn't mean that they are somehow uniquely dangerous, or they are just dangerous. And so what I'm trying to do is having a more nuanced conversation about these drugs. And if you have a more nuanced conversation about these drugs, then it raises questions about the way you legislate, the way you regulate these drugs. And it also raises questions about, well, why are we punishing people who get caught with certain drugs so harshly versus other drugs? And then you start to see the irrationality that goes into making drug policy. And then it wouldn't be so bad if you had irrational drug policies if they were not to have the consequences that they have.
The punitive
aspect. It wouldn't be right if they wouldn't have those sort of really horrible negative consequences on a select group of people. And that's what's happening. And so that's my concern.
Right. So again, to go back a little bit, as you pointed out, 80 to 90% of people who use these so-called illicit drugs literally have no problem with them. Function, get through the day, right, et cetera.
Yeah, so
and there's no reason to not let them do
sure.
anything else.
So
just continue.
Right. So we've known this for many years.
Right.
We've known that 80 to 90% of the people who use drugs like crack cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, all of these drugs are not addicted. We know these people don't have problems. In fact, we can think about the last three guys who've occupied the White House. Bill Clinton used marijuana, George Bush used marijuana, widely suspected of having used cocaine. Barack Obama has used marijuana and cocaine. Those guys didn't have a drug problem. In fact, they went on to occupy the highest office in the land, and they've done some great things for their country. And they've we may disagree with their policies or their politics, but
and the leading nominee for the Republican Party certainly could be put in that category too. But all right, that's another story.
The point is that there have been people, and there are people who are contributing to this society and doing doing a great job, and they use illegal drugs, and that is the rule and not the exception. What we see presented in movies, documentary films, on TV, and told in stories and repeated, are the exceptions. The people who are having these problems with drugs, the ones who are addicted and their lives are destroyed, and we blame drugs. And that's illogical when you consider the fact that the vast majority of people who use that same drug do not have a problem. So you can't blame the drug. It requires you to look at something else.
These are the outliers.
These are the exceptions. So it requires you to look at, well, what else is going on in that person's life? What's unique about that person? Could be that that person has some co-occurring psychiatric illness or some physical illness. It could be that that person has no other option. This is the best option that they have. It could be that that person just has limited skills in tempering their behavior in any domain. It could be a wide range of things.
Absolutely.
But you can't blame the drug.
It's very complex. Yeah.
But what has happened in the U.S., we have felt comfortable in blaming the drug, and it appears that we are doing something about a problem, when in fact you're not doing anything about the problem. You're only selectively targeting a group of people who the society doesn't usually care about. In many cases, it's black and brown people in the United States, but when you leave the United States, it's other people. So you go to the Philippines, they're poor people. You go to Northern Ireland, they're poor white people. So it all depends where you're at, but drug policy in itself has been used as a tool to further marginalize people. And when I see this as a scientist who studies drugs and who really knows drugs, and I know that we have exaggerated the harms of drugs in order to facilitate those awful policies, it's hard for one not to be upset and outraged by this if you care about humans, your fellow citizens.
Where does the lie come in? What about, you used that term before. What were you driving at there? We've been lied to.
Yeah, we've been lied to.
Who's doing the lying? For what reasons?
There are multiple people doing the lying. Politicians, oftentimes when they talk about drugs, for example, you could think about the Democrats or the Republicans right now. We're talking about opiate, prescription opioids, and heroin, and people are saying how dangerous these drugs are.
And the crisis, right?
This crisis, this epidemic. When you actually look at the numbers, and when I think of epidemic, I think of things like Ebola, where you see this rapid increase in the illness and disease related to it. You don't see a rapid increase with opiates. Yes, use has absolutely increased, but you didn't in the past 10 years, right? It certainly has increased. The number of people who have used the drugs has certainly increased by some indicators. But the use of opiates or heroin, or let's just take heroin for example, has always been considerably lower than cocaine, considerably lower than something like marijuana. So that's one thing. But then when you think about, okay, we are concerned about people who potentially die from an opioid overdose, whether it's heroin or a prescription opiate. We are concerned. I'm concerned about that. But when you look at the numbers, you see that 75% of the people or more who die from an opioid-related overdose death die because they combine it with another sedative like alcohol or benzodiazepine. It's kind of difficult. It's really difficult to die from a heroin alone or opiate alone overdose death. It's not the easiest thing to do. This past summer, I worked in Switzerland, in Geneva, in a clinic where we gave heroin as part of the treatment to heroin addicts. Every day they came, and this was part of their treatment. We gave large doses. In some cases, people received as much as 1 gram a day of heroin. That's a lot of heroin. You rarely get anything close to that on the streets in the United States. And so when people are saying that people are dying from heroin overdoses, and without mentioning the additive effects of another sedative like alcohol, that is irresponsible, and that's
dishonest.
And dishonest. That's what I mean. And when I hear these politicians say this, and when I hear politicians and people saying we need more money in treatment, and when we know the vast majority of people who use these drugs don't need treatment. What we need, if we want to keep people safe, we need to do a better job in terms of education. Okay, if you're going to use these opiates, don't mix it with another sedative.
Which is what you're now beginning to write about more and more. Is that
so? I'm starting to write about this.
Education for people who are adults who are involved in drug use.
Right. So we're trying. The goal is, my goal is to keep people safe.
Right.
But I start with the assumption that adults are adults and that people will use drugs. Humans have always used psychoactive drugs. In fact, they should use psychoactive drugs if they know what they're doing. We use alcohol. Alcohol is our sort of #1 recreational drugs. It has a number of great effects. It's a social lubricant. It helps people to become more, help you to think of other people as being more interesting. It helps you deal with situations that you might otherwise have a more difficult time dealing with. But it also has potential negative effects. But we know those, and we try and teach those, and we try and minimize those negative effects and enhance the positive effect. The same is true with cocaine. The same is true with heroin. The same is true with these other drugs. So I start with that assumption. I start with the assumptions that adults know that heroin has some positive effects. And so my job is to try to help them minimize the negative effects while enhancing the positive effects. Now, as a society, our society can say that heroin is legal, it's illegal, and therefore you shouldn't use it. That's not my job. My job is to keep people safe. That's #1.
Okay, but are you then saying, as recommendations for policy, in addition to education, that we decriminalize and perhaps leading us as a society to fully legalize all drugs? Is that where you're moving, or thinking about where's the data of driving you in the sense?
We're thinking about policy. My position on policy. Again, I think about policy. In High Price, the book, I argued that we should decriminalize all drugs like they did in Portugal in 2001, in the Czech Republic.
So we're not just talking about pot here.
So you got Portugal, you got the Czech Republic, they've done it, and they have no interest in going back. They're happy with their policy. Decriminalization is different from legalization in that decriminalization basically treats drug violations like we treat traffic violation. You might get a citation and you might have to pay a fine, or maybe not. But you certainly don't get a criminal charge and you don't go to jail. So that's decriminalization. Legalization is what we do with alcohol. If you're of age, you can buy it and consume it, and without any worries of any sort of repercussion. Now, I have, over the past couple years, after having traveled the world, I have come to the conclusion that we ultimately have to have some legal form of drug regulation. That is, we need to regulate all of these things. In part because in New York City in 1977, marijuana was decriminalized. So small amounts of marijuana was decriminalized.
Okay.
But
1977.
1977. But as you know, until this past year, we were having something like 50,000 arrests for marijuana in New York City alone. That's because even with decriminalization, when you have groups that are vilified, you find a way to even arrest them under decriminalization. And so I think if we decriminalize drugs in the United States, there will still be ways in which it plays out in a racially discriminatory manner.
The same group will be gone after.
The same group will get...
So you're rethinking your stand and high price on decriminalization. You're still saying it should be regulated, though, but...
Well, alcohol is regulated.
Right.
Tobacco is regulated.
But it's
So
legalization and regulation at the same time.
We need to legally regulate it like we legally regulate alcohol.
Gotcha.
Absolutely.
Gotcha.
Now, if you do this sort of thing, that means you have to be more honest with your education. You now need to make sure people understand something about unit doses. Like we sell alcohol. Alcohol is such a potentially dangerous compound. If you take too much of it, you can just die.
Absolutely.
I mean, because it's a potentially dangerous compound. Alcohol withdrawal, when people have taken so much alcohol for extended periods of time, then they abruptly discontinue their alcohol use, they can die from alcohol withdrawal. It's the only one of these drugs that we're talking about, like heroin, methamphetamine, cocaine. You can't die from those withdrawals or that sort of thing. But alcohol is a potentially dangerous drug. But we sell it in certain unit doses such that we try to minimize that. We try to provide education about when it's appropriate to take alcohol. It's not appropriate to wake up in the morning and take a drink of alcohol and go to work. We know that's not appropriate.
Even though some people do that. What are they called, mocha drinkers?
Of course, people do it. I mean,
that's not the
you
point.
will never be able to control everyone's behavior.
Exactly.
But
Nor
the point
should we.
is that the vast majority of us use alcohol appropriate, in part because of our education and the way we have been doing it in the culture. You can do the same thing with cocaine. You can do the same thing with heroin. But you must first be honest about the education, and you must first make sure that the folks who are doing the education actually know something about pharmacology. Oftentimes, the people who are talking about drugs are just ignorant about pharmacology, about what drugs do, what drugs don't do, and so we have to change that.
You're being very kind when you say ignorant. I mean, can you begin to imagine the resistance you're going to get to this? From this, do you think? I mean, what you're saying, I mean, even more so than high price there. I mean, because you're battling a certain segment of the population that will not, and is so fearful of particular groups going out of control in their mind.
So the resistance, I'm a black man in America.
Right.
Black men make up about 6% of the general population in the United States. We make up about 35 to 40% of the prison population. So when you talk about resistance, I get resistance everywhere I go in the United States. So resistance is my life. That kind of resistance that you're talking about, that's nothing.
That's right.
Particularly when the facts are with me. That's easy. The resistance that I worry about is when it's so illogical and so irrational. That
criminal justice system takes over.
And so that's my life, resistance.
In your travels around the world, what are some of your experiences in other cultures? Are they as uptight about the whole issue of drugs, or can you compare some of your experiences around the world? Openness. What is America so peculiar in this in our history? We've always been this hard drinking country. I mean, in a sense, we've had such a reaction to the counterculture, hippie, drug
I got
use there.
Got it. So when I think about other cultures, I think about Switzerland, as I pointed out. I was there. They take a slightly different approach. Switzerland is a racially homogenous society, and they care first about their people. And so they think about these things from a public health perspective, or they think about these things as people who are using drugs as their own people. In the United States, one of the things so they have a different approach.
Yeah.
So instead of saying that heroin is the worst drug that anyone can use and it's this awful drug, they figured out a way to treat people who have heroin-related problems and take care of people. They figured that out because they're talking about their people. Yeah. In the United States, one of the things we have done, we have managed to dehumanize the people who use heroin or crack cocaine and these other drugs, such that they are not our people. And it's easier to dehumanize people when the people we have shown the face of some of these people as not looking like the white guys in Congress or the white guys who run the country. So, of course, they do it differently in a place like Switzerland. But then when you go to a place like Brazil is trying to be like the United States in that they dehumanize their drug users, in part because the face of the drug user does not look like the white guys who run the country. And so it's easier for them to dehumanize those folks. And so it depends on where you're at, and it depends on how different the view of the drug user is compared with the folks who are running the country. So it's a lot easier to dehumanize the drug user when that person does not look like the folks who are in control.
We don't have this serious dialogue, that is so necessary in this society. I mean, are you optimistic it's happening at the academic level at least, or certainly not at the political level? I mean,
it's not happening
Obama really hasn't
No. Let's be clear. This is not happening at the academic level.
It's not.
This is High Price was not an academic book. Mm-hmm. High Price was a trade book for the public.
Right.
I have written nearly 100 scientific articles, and this conversation is not happening in science. This is not. It should, but you have to also think about the people who do science. The vast majority of people who do science are white males, largely, but now a growing number of white females. And so this conversation is not being had because, in large part, because the consequences to their communities, the consequences of our bad policies to their communities are not as acute as they are for me. And so this is not happening in the academy, this conversation.
Yet you're looking at the same data.
We're looking at the same data, of course.
And you're seeing this in a much different light, the consequences and the reaction. And
because
they're morally numb to what they're actually seeing, it seems like. Or hypocritical, or so defensive about it.
Well,
or so racist.
Again, Jim, you have to think about the contingencies. When I say the contingencies, I mean the reinforcers and the behaviors. When I go home to Miami or my home or the hoods or whenever I go, I have to see my brothers, my cousins, my friends, my relatives, my people dealing with the consequences of these awful policies that are not based on the overwhelming empirical information.
Mm-hmm. Understood.
And I have to see this, and whereas some of my white colleagues never have to go home to communities like mine and see these kind of consequences. And so if you don't think about it, why would you take a chance? Why would you put yourself out here? Why would you do things differently, especially when you are being rewarded for just churning out more publications that might even support this sort of thing?
So the racism is so insidious and so deeply rooted.
See, this is the thing in our country. Racism is so pervasive, racial discrimination is so pervasive that you can't talk about this is not only drug policy, it's about it's pervasive throughout of our society. It's just that I'm an expert on drugs, and so I talk about it through that frame or that lens.
Right.
But you can bring some other expert here who studies banks, who studies something else, and you will get the same sort of thing if they are critical.
Going on. Yeah.
It's who we are. It's who we are in the United States. I mean, you know this. You and I both work in institutions that are predominantly white. My institution is in Harlem, and it is predominantly white. The institution, the faculty, the students, and few people even question that. And so it's like, how can you have this thing and no one's questioning?
And that's not in any way to put myself on any sort of pedestal. I was the only one arrested during the stop and frisk demonstration. The entire John Jay College. I mean, you'd think, some other academic would put two and two together there, and hey, take a chance. Not a one. So I know what you.
But hold on.
Go ahead.
So I don't know if people need to be arrested. I don't. That's not the marker for me. The marker for me is that people are actually doing something, and people are engaged, and people are trying
stand up
to
and being counted.
Absolutely.
And speak out. Absolutely, I agree with that.
Absolutely.
What about Black Lives Matter? Is that making some inroads here? Are some of the young people speaking to the elders? Is there hope there?
I think Black Lives Matter has been the most exciting activist activity that has happened in our country since the late 60s, the early 70s, and they give me so much hope. They give me so much hope because they're not concerned about being respectable, like so many of our other middle-class black people who have these positions, these jobs, and they're worried about what people will think. But these young cats, the Black Lives Matter, I'm so proud of them, and I hope they continue to push the society and push me, and I hope they push all of us.
Good front, right? One of the young men committed suicide.
Yes.
A couple weeks ago, but I couldn't agree with you more. Now, are you also? Are you in touch with the Sanders people, or in any way do you see your work translating into some progressive agenda that can have some political reality in this crazy, crazy campaign here?
Yeah, I have been in touch with their campaign, and we've had some conversation, but I'm not here to endorse or talk about. No. I just want to.
Is there a little openness?
I just like to make this clear.
Sure.
Politicians, by and large, are cowards, and those are not the people who I would like to waste my time with, and because they won't do anything that the people don't want them to do, and so my job is to educate the public. And the public puts the pressure on the politician through their votes and their voice, politicians will move. So I think it's, for me, it's a waste of my precious time talking to cowards. And I have no interest in doing that. And whether people consider themselves really progressive or conservative, whatever they consider themselves, when you start to look at all of those people's records, they all presided over this system that subjugates so many black people. And
liberal Democrats,
they
moderate,
all presided over this system, and they were all there. And so the question becomes, why haven't you been more vocal? Why weren't you more vocal? Why isn't this the most pressing problem? It's the most pressing problem in my life because I'm trying to raise these black boys in this society. And so when people act like there are other issues, and I'm sure there are, this is my issue. And I can't afford to be distracted because I have these black boys' lives depending on it.
How about your students at Columbia? How are they responding to your Are they into it? Do they get it? What are they going to make of it? Do they?
It's been a great thing that's been happening over the past several years. You know, I get students from all over the country, not only in Columbia, but people want to do what I do. They
Right.
want to take evidence, scientific evidence, to inform education and public policy. They want to know how to do this sort of thing. My students are the same way at Columbia, and that's great. But the students that I'm most excited about are the students that I teach in Sing Sing. So I teach in Sing Sing as well, and those students I'm really excited about because they actually have some experience with, they've been caught up, they have committed some crime, and they are changing their life in order, they're going to school in order to make a difference after having made some horrible mistake or paid some horrible price. And so those students give me more hope than any of my students.
Is that a program through Columbia, or?
It's a program I teach. Columbia plays a role in it, but
They get their degrees.
they get their degrees through Mercer College. But it's
Okay.
Columbia is a part of this program.
So you are there as a professor representing Columbia. And what do they say about your work? I mean, in the prison there, do they? What are some of the things that they're saying to you about what needs to be done? Legalization, education.
We don't really we haven't gotten into like what they think about the policies yet, because
What led them?
it's a course, and so
Yeah.
the major thing that I'm trying to help them to understand.
Right.
I'm trying to help them to learn how to interrogate every piece of information that they hear on the news, that they read, that they see in the newspapers. So they're learning how to interrogate information critically.
Oh, I see.
And they're
Okay.
trying, and I'm teaching them how to see how certain bits of information or certain statements, certain positions have been used or has contributed to their subjugation. And
Interesting,
so
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
teaching them, this is critical thinking.
Right.
How to evaluate the methodologies that's been used to arrive at this conclusion. And so I'm teaching them how to tear apart each detail. And so it's a beautiful thing for them to see how these things got past them. How when they read it.
How does that make them feel when they begin to realize that?
It's amazing. It's one of these things where you,
Wow.
I see this in my Columbia classes, but it's really stark in the prisons when the light bulb goes on, when they see, for example, they say things like some of the older guys may say, oh yeah, the marijuana that the kids are smoking today is not the marijuana that we're smoking. Today they're smoking this really high-grade, dangerous marijuana, and so they have accepted this rubbish that's been
The
fed.
label that's been given to them in the
This
institution.
rubbish has been fed to them. I mean, it's true that the average THC concentration on the street today is more than it was in 1970s. That's true. That's just because more people know how to increase the potency of the THC.
Right.
But in 1970s, there were people who were smoking really good weed. In 1970, there was always those people who smoked Sinsemilla and the best Sinsemilla. And today, there are people who smoke really crappy weed, and there always have been those people. It's just that the average concentration has increased because there's the internet and people know how to do it better. But
Yeah.
it's not like it's some new marijuana. It's like
Right.
someone saying that it's the difference between like drinking a beer versus
Right.
drinking vodka.
Right.
You know, it's alcohol. Alcohol is still the thing. You don't drink the two the same.
So the older inmates have internalized.
But the point, the point is when they realize that
Right.
this sort of rubbish
Right.
is the same rubbish that helps to pass these draconian and restrictive laws
Right.
that subjugates them,
Right.
then the light bulb goes off, and then then they realize I really have to think about things that I have accepted and internalized.
It's
and I
not
have
just
to,
me. It's not just
And I have to challenge these sorts
Okay.
of things, and I have to make sure that I have the evidence to support the position that I'm advocating or taking.
And how about the younger ones now? What's their attitude? More militant, more?
No, I mean, these guys, militant is not the phrase. They are, when I think of these guys, the phrase I think of is deep humanity. They are respectful and such humanity. So that's the phrase that I think of.
And the knowledge they're getting from you, the consciousness raising, is something that they're incorporating in their personalities and their being, which will enable them to go out and be much more loving and giving and caring human beings. So you've really, in a way, sort of healed them in a way that the system hasn't been able to, or working toward that.
Well, my goals are selfish, I should tell you. My goal is to train as many people in this society to critically evaluate what's going on so we can change it. And so we can change what we're doing, because if we don't change what we're doing, we continue to subjugate groups of people, largely who look like me. And so my goal is to get them to challenge the system, to get them to be able to challenge the system appropriately, with evidence, with the same language that the system, that the people in Congress use. And so that's my goal. And if we get them to challenge and change the system, then the system itself will be more conducive for loving and all the rest of those things. But if you don't get the system changed, you're going to have all of this continued bad behavior.
And it's interesting, as Cornel West has also written, this analysis, this consciousness raising, best occurs, or this transformation, at people who've been the most hurt, who've experienced the deepest trauma or catastrophe. And they're the ones that perhaps can help us all understand the pain that we've caused them and we're causing ourselves. And
Well, maybe you and Cornell can talk about that. My goals are, I'm a scientist, highly focused, and my highly focused goals is to increase critical thinking.
I understand.
And if we get that, we change the system.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, listen, on that positive note, thank you, Carl, so very, very much for being here. We've got to do this again, and I wish you all the best in life and your work, and take care, and I thank you so much for being here.
Good to see you again, Jim. All right.
And thank you so very, very much for being here and watching us again on The Radical Imagination. Julio, hi, and Patty, please tell us about the Fair Food Program that you're involved in and the Coalition of Farm Workers in Florida. We hear such wonderful, stupendous messages about your progress, and you've broken the backs of so many corporations and you're working with. You still have Wendy's to go, but tell us about your movement.
Cuéntanos un poco más sobre el programa por comida justa y la coalición de trabajadores Immokalee han logrado tanto en romper las espaldas de las corporaciones y todavía falta Wendy's. ¿Cómo lo han hecho? ¿Quiénes son?
Bueno, mi nombre es Julia.
Well, my name is Julia.
Por tanto tiempo, la Coalición de Trabajadores de Immokalee es una organización que nació a los principios de los 90.
Well, the Coalition of Immokalee Workers is an organization that came out in the 90s.
Porque en esos años había muchos problemas con los trabajadores agrícolas. Había muchos como el acoso sexual, el abuso verbal, los maltratos, la violencia con los trabajadores, hasta esclavitud moderna.
And we started organizing because there were a lot of issues that we were facing as farm workers, a lot of abuses, ranging from violence on the job to wage theft, sexual harassment, all the way up to modern-day slavery in the most extreme cases.
And you've worked as a farm worker for many years.
¿Y tú trabajaste como trabajadora
Sí,
agrícola
sí,
por
yo soy
muchos
trabajadora de agrícola.
And you experienced this and decided to organize.
¿Y tú sentiste esto y decidiste organizar?
Sí, yo soy trabajadora apenas, yo me involucré porque ellos tienen las actividades en la semana con la comunidad entera, porque toda la comunidad es más, son trabajadores que recogen los tomates, que piscan la naranja, que piscan otros productos que se cosecha en el área del suroeste de Florida.
Yeah, I got involved. I was a worker, and I got involved with the Coalition of Immokalee Workers by attending their weekly meetings and their other gatherings that they have in the community of Immokalee, which is made up of workers that pick all sorts of crops that are grown in Southwest Florida, from tomatoes, oranges, cucumbers, and other things.
So Julio's been, from the very beginning, part of
Desde un
this movement.
Desde un principio has sido parte de este movimiento.
Sí, yo participaba mucho como miembro, participaba como trabajadora y la lucha, pues, de tanto que se ha hecho, se ha llegado mucho beneficio, pero también nos paramos y también a la organización, porque es algo que beneficia a muchos trabajadores y nosotros necesitamos que más trabajadores, como ahorita estamos con los tomates y queremos que otros trabajadores que piscan otra cosecha también tengan el mismo beneficio y también alcance lo que nosotros ya hemos logrado.
So yes, I participated in the CIW as a member, as a worker, because I was seeing all of the changes that were being made and the conditions before and all of the benefits that we were getting thanks to the Fair Food Program. And I decided to organize with my fellow workers. And right now I work on getting more workers to become involved in the tomato industry, but also beyond, because I believe, and I think that we believe, that these benefits should extend to all workers, and that's why the struggle continues.
And how have you been connected, Patty?
Sure. I work with the Alliance for Fair Food, which is an organization, a national network of people that works in solidarity with the Coalition of Immokalee Workers. And I became involved as a student ally. Students have had incredible participation in the campaign for fair food, which is the campaign that has won all of these corporations to come on board to the Fair Food Program. As a student,
14, right?
14.
So
14
tell us the good
corporations.
news. Yeah, so you've made enormous progress, right?
Cuéntanos un poco más del progreso que han hecho 14 corporaciones.
More needs to be done, but
Más hace falta, pero...
Sí, tenemos, como al principio era la campaña de tenemos ese programa bonito que es el programa por comida justa. Ahora, pues bueno, tenemos 14 ya esos grandes compradores que están de acuerdo que también se elimine ese tipo de problemas, todos los abusos, los malos pagos, los malos, todo lo que incluye el programa. 14 participando, con ello ya tenemos mucho logro. Ahorita los trabajadores tienen el espacio que es...
traducir la primera parte. We have...
a lot to talk about.
yeah, a lot to talk about. Let me just make sure that I can translate everything. So yes, we have the Fair Food Program, which basically brings all of these corporations who agree that these abuses should be eliminated, and we should work on improving conditions in the fields. And we bring growers and workers and these corporations together to do that. And it's because they agree that these should be eliminated.
But Wendy's has held out, and you're here in New York organizing for a massive demonstration. We want to support you, so tell us what you are now trying to do here in New York.
Cuéntanos un poco del programa y también qué están haciendo con Wendy's aquí en Nueva York.
Bueno, el programa, es una colaboración que tenemos de trabajadores con las corporaciones, los grandes compradores, y junto con los rancheros, que tenemos un 90% que están participando bajo el programa, y seguimos con la campaña.
So yeah, to go back to the program briefly, it's this program that brings 14 corporations on board and 90% of Florida's tomato growers to work on eliminating these abuses. And we keep going with the campaign to strengthen the gains of the Fair Food Program.
And you're here in New York, specifically going to have a demonstration March 3rd, is that correct?
Yes. ¿Van a tener una demostración el 3 de marzo?
Sí, seguimos con la campaña porque también queremos de los grandes 5 corporaciones de comida rápida que tenemos, de los 5, Wendy ha sido la que no ha firmado, queremos que ellos participen. No odiamos a Wendy, sino que queremos que ellos participen bajo el programa para que también los trabajadores tengan beneficios como los demás, porque sabemos que hay muchos problemas todavía que no se ha alcanzado llegar. Por eso queremos que ellos formen parte para ahí tener más fuerza y poder lograr lo que los otros le hace falta.
So Wendy's is the last of the top 5 fast food companies in the U.S. that hasn't signed on to the program. And so we want Wendy's to come on board. We don't hate Wendy's. We just want them to be a part of the program and participate and take responsibility for extending these benefits to workers and be a part of the changes that they need to be a part of, because we know that there's still a long road ahead and that a lot of workers are still needing to experience the Fair Food Program, and we really need Wendy's participation in order to strengthen and expand those benefits.
And how can we help? Oh, go ahead.
Por eso es que el 3 de marzo vamos a tener una pequeña marcha en donde invitamos a toda la comunidad. Como siempre, en toda nuestra victoria siempre han participado los aliados, la gente de fe, la comunidad entera, y es la invitación que le hacemos a la gente para que participen, también tomen conciencia y también vayan aprendiendo del porqué de nuestra lucha.
So on March 3rd,
Yes.
we're inviting everybody who is an ally in New York City to a march that we're having. We're inviting the folks who have always supported us, students and youth, people of faith, food justice advocates, all sorts of people who believe in what we're doing, and we want them to come and build up the force of our campaign and take it through so that we can all work together in making these changes a reality.
And where specifically will this march take place? What time? Where can we all meet you and help you with all of this?
¿Y dónde y cuándo va a ser?
Va a ser aquí en la calle 8 y 58, ¿cómo se llama? Sí, entre la 8 y 58, cerca de Columbus Circle, también,
Columbus Circle, okay.
Para que todos puedan asistir y también apoyarnos. Lo que se le pide es nuestra campaña, 1 centavo más por libra de tomate que compren, y esto va directamente en beneficio para los trabajadores.
So we're asking everybody to come out on March 3rd, Thursday, March 3rd at 4 p.m. We're going to be gathering at West 58th Street between 8th Avenue and 9th Avenue. And I would add that we're marching to the offices of Nelson Peltz, who's the chairman of the board of Wendy's and the CEO of Trian Partners, which is the largest shareholder of Wendy's. And so we'll be marching all the way to his offices, and we hope that everybody will be able to participate.
Meet at that point between 8th and 9th Avenue on 58th Street.
Entre la 8 y 9
Okay.
Avenida. En calle
And take a
58.
little tour demonstration around Trump Palace there too. As well. It's close by. He could use it too. But listen, thank you so very, very much for coming here and telling us a little bit about what your efforts have been. I hope you'll come back when we have more time. I really would like to congratulate you so much in your work, and our audience will be supporting you, and just keep on. And thank you again so very, very much for your efforts.
Gracias a él que nos dio el espacio, porque nos gustaría que otras más televisiones o radios tuviéramos espacio para poder informar a la comunidad.
Thank you so much for giving us the space to be on your show and the time. We also hope that other TV and radio and other media will also support us in amplifying this action and mobilizing the community to support us.
Absolutely. and Cesar Chavez is looking down
César
on
Chávez
the
está
incredible work you're
mirando hacia
doing.
abajo.
So
Sí, sí.
thank you so very much. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you.